Hi folks, my name is Adam and I like to make tiny nerdy things. And last week I made my own ridiculously expensive Pokemon card and turned it into a sculpture. This week I thought, why not make the most expensive card and turn that into an even sweeter sculpture? I've always been morbidly fascinated by the card collecting world and its willingness to shell out ridiculous quantities of money for what is essentially a piece of cardboard from a children's card game. Then, while talking to my dad, I got overly defensive about something that I really don't have an opinion on, and the answer hit me. If money were no option, would I rather spend $186 million on Mark Rothko's number 6 or $200,000 on a dope-ass Pokemon card that tickles me deep in the cockles of my nostalgia organ? I feel like the answer is pretty obvious. Neither. I'd rather just print it out and make something of my own. So that's what I did. Basically, I scour the internets for as high quality a photo of the card as I can get, then I blow it up in Photoshop, increase the colors, sharpen the edges, then print it out on some extra sturdy cardstock. Then I print out a copy of the back of the card, and once I've cut it out, I can glue the two pieces together and I'm left with a pretty sweet first edition Charizard card that costs roughly 3p. Of course, I could stop there, but I won't, because I don't. And I'm going to start to cut up other cards to make some highlights of some of the important or interesting parts of the card. Pokemon cards aren't really ideal for this since they have fewer individual parts, but I've done the same thing with Magic cards and Hearthstone cards in the past, and they look pretty awesome by the end of it. Now with my card done, I can start making my Chad Lizard. I'll start with a single strip of high gauge wire strapped into a couple pieces of wood to help hold it up. Then I can bend that wire into shape before adding some aluminum foil to help bulk it up and keep the weight to a minimum. And then finally a thin coat of cosplay will hold it all in place. And then that goes in the oven to cure the base layer of clay and I can get to work bulking up my body. Now Charizard is a dragon with a dad bod, so while he doesn't have a whole lot of muscular definition, he's got a pretty impressive beer keg strapped to his waistline, and I want to make sure that I get the roundness correct. Now as with most Pokemon, Charizard is smooth, like real smooth. We're talking Olympic swimmer smooth. So much like an Olympian that didn't make the podium, I'm gonna turn to alcohol for help. Using alcohol helps to soften the top layer of clay, allowing me to smooth any rough sections, remove fingerprints, and leave me with a ridiculously smooth, armless, legless, headless Charizard ready for the oven. Then I can get started on the rest of his details. I'll start with the head by making the upper jaw and attaching it to his neck knob. Then once I've got the general shape, I'll add the bottom jaw and gradually refine the shape by adding little balls of clay until I'm happy. I'll make his patented angry eyebrows by adding some little wormy dealies onto his 5 head, then I'll carve out and smooth the area where his eyeballs are going to be. Finally, I will add a couple balls to the tip of his snout so that I can add a bit more detail onto his face. Now up until this point, he looks kind of like an angry snake that ate a toddler, so I'm going to give him some horns to really sell that dragon look. Finally, I can give him a little bit of definition around the neck by adding some more wormy dealies, so it's not quite so boring and round. And once everything's been smoothed out with a quick coat of alcohol, I can stick his tongue in place and add some teeny tiny dragon teeth. Chad the Lizard doesn't skip leg day, so he's got some pretty chunky, albeit stocky little legs. They're so stocky, in fact, that I'm not even going to bother with an armature since the clay is thick enough to hold its shape, and since he's not going to be standing on them, they don't need any reinforcement. Now, while his legs are chalky and thick, I'm not sure how much use his arms get, since they're tiny and ineffectual. I mean, if I had wings and legs like those, you can damn well bet I'd have teeny tiny arms too. I mean, I suppose that I don't have wings or impressive legs, and I do have teeny tiny arms, but that's not the point. The point is that because they're tiny, I need to use an armature so that they can support their own weight. An armature works essentially like a skeleton and it helps support the smaller body parts. But much like a skeleton, if the body is fat enough, you can actually make it without an armature as long as you don't plan on putting any weight on it. Now admittedly, it has been some time since I studied anatomy, but I'm pretty sure that's correct. At any rate, the body is done, which means the only thing left to do is the aforementioned wings. I know myself better than to try and eyeball the size and shape of the wings, so I'm going to make myself a wee template out of paper. Now to make this template, I'm going to eyeball the size and shape of the wings, then fold that paper in half and cut it out. This will leave me with two identical wings that I can then make out of a single sheet of super thin cause clay. Cause clay is perfect for making wings since it's super flexible even when it's thin, so you don't need to worry about breaking it while you're handling it. Now I do want to point out that cause clay is not a sponsor, I just like their stuff. But if you're watching Mr. Clay, hit me up. With the wings cut out, I want to add a bit of wire to the top. This will give me something to anchor into the back of Chad, and it will also help to support the wings and give them some shape. Cause clay is sticky enough that I could just blend it onto the wire without needing to glue it, so then all I need to do is add a little bit of strip over top of it to help hide the wire and bulk out the top of the wing. Then a quick spinal tap and a bit of glue, I can mount the wings onto the back of Chad, taking him from an angry horned gecko to a mighty fire-breathing dragon. Then all that's left to do is twist the wings into the shape that I want them, then I can add all the final details on top. Then it's into the oven with Chad for one final bake and I can get started on the base. Now my idea here is that I want the card to be surrounded by flames and have Chad bursting out of the center. I also wanted to make the thumbnail look like I'm lighting an original first edition Charizard on fire just to get those hate clicks and rage views, so I'm going to start a small fire in my studio. Now it should go without saying that you really ought not play with fire, but given my propensity for flailing knives around and the generally unsafe way I do things, you really should be careful with anything I do anyways. However, to assuage my lawyer's nerves, I'll just say, don't light stuff on fire. Now with the real fire finished, I can make the fake fire using this stuff. This is translucent clay, and I don't know if it'll work, but I'm gonna go all in and hope for the best rather than test it out ahead of time because, well, that feels like more work and I prefer doing less work. I'll start by building a frame out of aluminum foil, trying to get as much of the fiery shape as possible. This is a very important step and integral to my final design. Once I've got a good shape for my frame, I'll roll out some really thin sheets of translucent pasta and then cover the entirety of the frame. And once the frame is covered and I can't see any of that shiny aluminum beneath, I'll use my ball stylus to add some flamey texture. Then it's into the oven to bake for 30 minutes at 130 degrees Celsius. Probably. I didn't set a timer and my oven isn't that accurate, so it's kinda plus or minus 10 minutes and about 15 degrees. At any rate, when it comes out of the oven, it should be hard and roughly the color of dried mayonnaise. Actually, when it goes into the oven, it looks like fresh mayo, and when it comes out, it looks like dried mayo. Coincidence? Anyways, now's the time to pull all of that aluminium out, making sure to get into all the nooks and crannies and yank as much as you possibly can so you have a nice, thin, translucent body in which to place your bright blue fairy lights. Ideally, I'd be using red or orange lights, but as it turns out, I don't have any, and it was either the bright blues or multicolored Christmas lights. Shouldn't matter though, as I'm going to be painting the clay. Now I want to try and jam the lights as far up my fire spires as I can, and then hold it all in place with some hot glue. I've also poked a couple lights up through a hole I cut in the center, which will fit through the card and into another fiery spire that will sit on top. Then a quick test to make sure I didn't melt anything with the hot glue, and you can see just how well this clay works. Just imagine the blue is red. Then we're on to the painting. Now I've got 3 pieces to paint, and all the painting is going to be done either using orange, yellow, or red. Or a bit of black, I guess. You can paint easily enough with a paintbrush. Yellow and orange have about as much coverage as AT&T, so I'm going to save myself a few hours and crack out the airbrush. Now I want to keep the translucency of the clay as translucent as I can, so I'm going to be using inks. In reality, this was probably overkill since the airbrush will let me spray thin enough layers that it won't matter, but inks are great if you want to keep the underlying colors since they're often very transparent to begin with. It did mean, however, that even using the airbrush, this took me a hell of a lot of coats to get a nice, even coverage. Fortunately for the orange and red highlights though, since they'll be at the tips of the fire spires and should be less bright than the yellow, I can use some of the more opaque paints. Now in the end I decided not to dust the tips with black since I like the more cartoony look of the sootless fire. So the final pass I did with a gloss varnish just to give my fire the glossy finish that you normally associate with fire, I guess? Now Chad Lizard though is not translucent, so he just gets a straight up orange coat. However, I wanted him to be a dirty sort of brownie orange rather than the bright orange, so I'm not going to give him any priming. As long as you clean any dirt and oil off the clay, you can paint directly onto cured clay with acrylic paint and you shouldn't suffer any horrible consequences. If it does end up being tacky or not drying properly, just don't show that part when you make your YouTube video. I also wanted a tiny bit of variation in the color, so I'm going to highlight some of the larger surfaces with just a tiny bit of yellow. Then once that's all dried, I can move on to the paintbrush stuff. The undersides of his wings get painted a nice dark aqua, and then to highlight his cowardly personality, I'll paint his belly yellow. Now, even with a base coat of orange, painting his belly still took about 5 coats to get a good even coverage. Then I can paint his mouth with a dark terracotta, get his tongue a nice pink, and then I can paint each of his many 4 teeth white, along with his eyes, finger claws, and toe claws. Then with the white sections done, all I need to do is paint the colors onto his eyeball. Then I can give both of his eyes and his mouth a coat of shiny gloss varnish. Then I'm on to assembly, and this should be a nice quick job. Pretty straightforward. The card gets glued onto the fire, Chad gets glued onto the pillar, then the Chad pillar gets glued onto the card. Then the only thing left to do is quick test the lighting underneath, and we're on to the Glamour Shots. There you have it, folks. I hope you like this one, because I'm stoked with how well this turned out, and if you didn't like it, well, I just don't know what I'll do with myself. As always, a huge thank you to my patrons, as they are the people that make these videos possible, and a special thank you to my newest patrons, Jessica A., Logan Carlson, Artsy Geeky, Another Alex, Imaginary Potato, Corwin, Juliasto, Ghost Breath, Kristen Kwong, Kate Maskell, Adam Obanoff, The Alleyrat 2.0, McGee, and Luke Dembski. You are the fiery hot wind beneath my Charizard wings. If you'd like to help out, then consider subscribing, sharing this video, liking, and leaving me a comment down below. If you want to see what I'm up to as the week goes on, or you want to keep me fed, then head on over to my Patreon. Otherwise, we'll see you next week. Cheers.